Rolling.
Alright, that one's rolling. Rolling. It's in frame.
Yeah.
Please introduce yourself and your former homecoming title.
My name is Ryan A. Paul. I was the former director of events for Homecoming 22, as well as the executive producer and director of the Homecoming Experience.
So let's start from the beginning. Why did you join the homecoming board in the first place, and what made you stay on the board during your time here?
So I joined Homecoming 2021 back when I was a freshman here at Virginia Tech, and I came in a COVID freshman. People say it all the time, but it's like a COVID freshman. But yeah, I came in as a COVID freshman, and I knew coming from high school where I was the chief executive officer of the student council, I had the leadership skills and I had the passion for events and production, and I was leading teams in high school. So I knew at the beginning, no matter what, I wanted to do something like I was doing in high school. So homecoming board was the closest thing. And with everything being virtual, I met some of the homecoming board members during Virtual Gobbler Fest back in September or October of 2020. And I knew I was gonna apply, so I applied and I got the assistant director role. And I stayed with that all of, the rest of my fall semester, all of the spring semester of 2021. And we eventually got to the point where we made Homecoming 21 happen. And honestly, the other question of why'd you decide to stay, it's funny because originally I was not going to stay. I remember telling all my friends, I told my mom, I'm like, I'm not coming back to homecoming. And I don't want to get into depth about the people who I kind of had a little tension with, but overall, as a whole, I just felt overlooked and undervalued, and I did not want that to repeat itself. So I remember Lamar Walker, our former homecoming advisor, who's now at Duke University, it was after homecoming, I think November-ish, and we had a one-on-one meeting, and I told him I wasn't coming back to homecoming. And I was just listing everything I would change and everything I would do to make it better. And then he said something along the lines of, so are you sure you don't want to apply for the director role? And I thought about it for a while. I'm like, mm-mm. And then as I thought about it some more, I was like, wait, I have a lot of things I want to change. And one of the biggest things mainly was the revamp of events. The same events have been happening for a long time. And I saw for Homecoming 21, it wasn't really serving the student population we have now. So that was one thing I really wanted to change, was the event portfolio. So long story short, I applied for director. I shared all my ideas and I left it all out on the table for the committee. And I got the email saying I got the role of director of events. And I think that was when I felt like I was in a position to kind of make my own decisions and build what I really wanted. And the start of that was the revamp of homecoming as a whole.
Now you kind of mentioned how you wanted to change some of the events. So walk me through each event. How did it all come together?
So we had the homecoming kickoff, which was in replacement of the campfire kickoff. And the homecoming kickoff was essentially the kickoff event of Homecoming 22. It was a kind of cookout type of environment. So we had all the court candidates, all 15 of them, displayed out on the Prairie Quad lawn, and they all had interactive games. We had both of the dining services food trucks, then we had Homestead Creamery, we had live music. So it was really just a space to kick off the homecoming celebrations. It wasn't supposed to be so strictly, timeline where this is happening this time, that's happening that time. For the event planning of it and management, yes, you have to have that, but for the experience of the students, I didn't really want that environment. So there was still structure, but it was pretty much free reign of just come and have a good time. And then from kickoff, we went into the showcase. And the showcase was, I think, the largest really event because that was a full revamp of what we called Homecoming's Got Talent. So the Homecoming showcase was a culmination of music, dance, and other artistically creative talents all in one place for one night only with one main goal of entertainment. That was the one-liner that was emailed, that was displayed everywhere, and I felt like that represented what the show would be. So I really started planning out the showcase back in November 2021 before I accepted director of events because I was working with production services, and I saw Exodus, the K-pop group. I saw the performance because I was working production, and I was just blown away by the talent of the students and the fact that they choreographed everything, wardrobe. I was shocked. So then that was like the first catalyst of, but how many other student groups or students do we have that are so talented that don't get to showcase their talent? So when I accepted the role and we kind of transitioned into spring of 22, I knew I wanted either two names of the event, either Homecoming Extravaganza or Homecoming Showcase. And as time went on, it was like the Homecoming Showcase, it just fit because it was the showcase of student talent. So that progressed into planning out all the acts. It was going into depth with the music, with the design, and I was very intentional about every single detail. And we moved all the way from spring 2022 with the planning and the production, the building of it, and I started pitching to headliners. So we had Exodus at Virginia Tech, we had Cultural Dance Crew, as well as Ballet Project. And I had this really awesome version of Eye of the Tiger that I've been envisioning for months that I wanted to come to life on the homecoming stage. And when I pitched those groups, they loved it, and they worked over the summer to put it together. And then when we met in the fall, I got to see it for myself in one of our first rehearsals, and I was just like, I was so happy. It was one of those things where you don't know how it's gonna turn out, but you may know it may be great, but seeing it, I was just like, that's more than I could have ever asked for. Because they also were like in love with the process, they loved the song, and they appreciated my vision, which I really, really enjoyed. And then the third thing we kind of had for Homecoming was the new production, Homecoming Court 72 Questions, or as anyone who worked with me, it was HC 72Q. And with that production, we knew prior to Homecoming 22 that one of the main feedback for everyone was, we don't really know who the Homecoming Court is. Like, what are they? Who are they? I don't feel like I know them. So we took that and we started planning out ways we can incorporate that. And it was funny, it was the first meeting of the spring semester. I remember the exact date, January 18th. It was Trish Grace, one of my assistant directors and producer of my projects, where she was like, Ryan, what if we basically did a Vogue 73 Questions thing? And I immediately saw it in my head and I was like, yes. And we just kind of started planning it out like that. But I also think with coming on as director of events, I knew I wanted some other element besides the event revamps. I wanted some video component. Like, I felt like visually, nothing really was online of what Homecoming was. So that's when the Homecoming experience was born. I knew back in November 2021 that I wanted a full comprehensive documentary, which we're doing now. And then I also wanted like an event recap of Homecoming. So all these things are coming to fruition. And then Homecoming Court 72 Questions was in addition to that. And then Thursday, Black Student Alliance put on an amazing laugh riot, as they always do. And then Friday, we had the beloved Homecoming Parade, and that was such a blast. We really just utilized a lot of the same techniques that we did for Homecoming 21, because everyone loves the parade. It's one of those community events that you really can't miss, and seeing all the kids there and senior citizens, it was such a great time with staging everyone and making them go on their way. And I have to shout out the Office of Special Events because they did a projection map of the history of Virginia Tech, because it was the 150th anniversary. I'm not gonna say the name that starts with an S because I always mess it up, but it was so great because it was just beautiful and it was stunning. And I saw the early renderings of it with our PR team, but to see it in person and to see other people react to it, I was like, I'm just so happy that it came to life. And they did such an amazing job. And then SAA took on the Spirit Rally for after the parade. And after the parade, everyone is just full of joy, and then it's leading up to the homecoming game. And then we get to that Saturday, and we get to halftime, and we get to the announcement of the homecoming royalty, and that's also just another special moment.
Sounds like a really packed week, but how did the first homecoming board film come to be?
Well, we first started with having Homecoming 22's event team plan out what we were expecting to produce for October. And within that, like I said, Trish Grace, she brought up the idea of having Vogue 73 Questions. And when we thought about that some more, we really saw that we could do it. And one of the largest things that we ran into was we need help. And I was like, I can't do this by myself. I need someone who can be camera, who can do the voice. Because if you've watched Vogue 73 Questions, it's an environment and an experience with how it looks and how it feels. And I wasn't necessarily trying to replicate the exact feeling of that, but I was replicating the structure to fit Virginia Tech's homecoming court. And we, at that point, back in January of 22, the homecoming court wasn't announced. We didn't really know anything. So Trish and I were just planning as best that we could. So one of the things I was so happy I was able to do was create my cinematography team. So in one of my film classes in the spring of 22, there were so many talented people in that class. And I remember one of the first assignments we had, it was like introduce yourself. So everyone records a video introducing like, hey, my name is XYZ, this is my major, and maybe a fun fact. And everyone, they were showing their videos, and then there's this one video by one particular person. His name was Maxwell Mandel. And I looked at the video, I was just like, hold on now. Like his video was so spectacular, it was stupid. Like stupid in the fact of why no one else thought about, I can't, hold on, let me compose myself. Watching that for the first time, beyond my shock, I was like, that is talent. It looks so good. And then the whole class was blown away like, well, actually, I don't want to go anymore. I don't want to show my video because Maxwell just showed his. So I knew at that moment, I was like, he's the one. He's the one I need to be my director of photography. And then as time went on, I eventually pitched it to him. He loved it. And then he was like, I remember in one of our first meetings, he was like, I need a director. And I come from a background of producing events and directing events, but not really directing like film or video. So I was like, sure, I'll get you a director. But at that point, it was like February, and to find a director who understood my vision enough to execute it how I would execute it, it just really didn't work. So then I made the decision to be the director of the Homecoming Court 72 Questions film. And it started to just unravel where more people from my class started showing their work, and I was just observant, and I just kept recruiting that way. So recruited Noah Hayden, Jillian Calhoun, and then eventually Luke Dangle to be the voice, and then later recruited Jack Morgan to be another director of photography. So at the end of it, and Madison Brown, love you, Madison, for sound and lighting. So at the end of it, I had like 6 people on the cinematography team. I was managing the 2-team events team. And together we just kind of worked out all the pre-production with scripting, with figuring out equipment, and I was learning how to direct at the same time. So my homework, I watched all of the Vogue 73 Questions, all 700 plus minutes. I'll say it again, 700 plus minutes of content. Because I wanted to be a student of the craft of production. And yes, I have a cinema minor, but I didn't necessarily do all my work myself. It was very surface level for me. So like taking it a step above was really cool. So I just knew I had to be a student of it. And yeah, so I think after the spring happened, and it was about May or April when we started scheduling all the court candidates for their shoots for September. And everything started to kind of take shape after that. I think when we came back in the fall, it was difficult because it was such a rigorous production schedule. It was the first or second week in the school year or semester where we started production, and there were 3 shoots a day. And then sometimes, being the main producer, I see it's gonna rain. I have to reschedule people and reorder things. So that's the hardest part, but like it had to be done. And we shot every single weekend, and my team, events team, production team, they took everything for the weekend of September 9th, because that's when I was at the Emmy Awards with the primetime show, and they did an amazing job. So after we finished shooting at the end of September, there was like a week of post-production, which is not the most ideal for a project of this size. Like we had 15 court candidates who had different scenes or segments for this project. So I knew how everything would lay out well in advance, but to actually put it together and visually see everything was hard because you couldn't be picky because you had 3 hours to get this one thing done and you had another 2-hour session. And then by the end of that 2-hour session, it needs to be finished. So I like to be picky. I want to make the best project as possible. Because we spent so much time and effort planning it, I directed it, and editing it was another journey. But that was, I think, the journey of the first homecoming board film, that two-part production. Jack, thank you.
Yes.
Looking back, are you proud of your work and its impact?
Yeah, I think the proudest I ever felt, and I'm so glad I was able to tell most of my team this, is when other people recognize the work of not just myself for the homecoming board, but themselves. So, for example, when we dropped the trailer or the first look for Homecoming Court 72 Questions, the first film, we got to the homecoming court meeting and people were just bum rushing me with, "Oh my gosh, Ryan, it looks so good," and "Oh my gosh, Maxwell, it's so great," and "I love it." And it was so overwhelming, kind of like, "Oh my gosh, thank you." Like, people are seeing what I've seen in my team for months, and then people making comments about Luke and his voice and how amazing it is, and it just felt so good to have the team recognize. So I think that is kind of my answer to that question. I think I felt proud when we had the premiere and we were being sent photos of watch parties because the Homecoming Court was watching it with their organizations. We had a premiere in a really small room with a few board members, but then it was also like after, the film was released on that Wednesday of Homecoming, it was getting emails from people I don't really know or really know at all. It was getting emails from people we worked with in the past saying how great it was and it's never really been done before. It was being at rehearsal for the football game, for the halftime show, and parents pointing out specific, things. "Oh, I love this one part when my daughter or son did X, Y, and Z, and I love the camera movement." And they were using all these like cinematic terms. "I love, the dolly shot. Did you use a dolly?" I'm like, "No, we use the gimbal." They're like, "Oh, you don't use like Steadicam?" I'm like, "No, we don't. That's like really expensive." "Oh, that's so cool." That felt so good because it just felt wholesome. It felt like beyond the feedback from students, which was really important for us, it was also the people who literally birthed the Homecoming Court, their parents, guardians. So that felt really special to me. So I do feel proud of everything that transpired.
So did your ambition blow your mind?
I think I've been doing events since high school, and I had a great advisor or teacher. His name was Robert Waters, and he really pushed me. I failed a lot as far as he gave me the space to try out my ideas and see if they worked or not. Even though he sometimes knew they wouldn't work, he let me fail, and it helped because we'd have conversations about them. So coming into Virginia Tech with that knowledge and experience, and then also from Beyonce University, from studying her work and from her team, I want to say my ambition kind of blew my mind, but also,
So you have that camera rented for the whole month?
before I start or commit to a project, I do envision how it's going to turn out. So whether that be the way I feel or the way I want other people to feel or the way it actually looks, I know that before it even happens, but exactly how it happens, that's what blew my mind, because I never would have thought that, when I pitched to people about Homecoming Board, they would actually want to be a part of it. So when I pitched to Maxwell or, Jillian and Noah, and then when eventually Madison, and then Luke, and then Jack, that's 6 people who I brought on that I never would have imagined would have wanted to do it. I just was like kind of hopeful for it. And then even with the events with Homecoming Showcase, having 3 separate dance groups, not just names, but dance styles between K-pop, ballet, and then cultural dance crew, which is hip hop. It's very Black centric. Those are so many different. That's 3 different huge dance styles coming together for an opening and a closing number. It was a stretch. It was a reach to have that idea, but the fact that they were all for it and wanted to try it out was really, really great. And then seeing it come together at rehearsal and then live, we did exactly what we set out to do. And the way that we got there changed a little bit, but at the end of the day, we executed exactly.
So you were stepping into the unknown. So can you tell me a little bit about that journey?
Yeah. I think for me, directing for a film was definitely unknown. Dealing with more people under my direction. So directing different teams with communication, with documents. And I think it was hard because when you have kind of a lot of the main knowledge, trying to decipher who to communicate what to and how and in what depth, I guess, because not everyone needs to know everything. And that's what I struggled with at first, because you're communicating with your events team who is dealing with all the event stuff, but then your production team also needs some pieces of that information, but they don't need to know the nitty-gritty of the events. And my events team doesn't need to know the nitty-gritty of the production. So striking that balance was very much unknown. And yeah, I think the unknown helped. It created something better than what I could have imagined. And it created imperfection, I think, which was really big for me, because I never kind of categorized myself as a perfectionist. But like, say like we were recording a take for the first film, Homecoming Court 72 Questions. Like, say there was, a sliver of the tree in frame. I'll be like, okay, take that out. Or say there's an audio flare. Like, there are certain things that like Maxwell and I, we saw and we kind of picked apart and determined if it was worth doing another take. But I think every kind of shoot was unknown, because as we started shooting, we knew that the location may not work out, or it may be too loud, or the sun would move, or sometimes the questions just didn't take. Like, they just didn't feel like the person. And I wrote all of them for all 15 of them, and Trish ordered them and structured them. And sometimes it just didn't work out. But having the skill and awareness to change on the fly was really important. And yeah.
Do you want to shout anyone out?
I want to shout out my amazing cinematography team: Maxwell Mandel, Luke Dangle, Jack Morgan, Madison Brown, Noah Hayden, and Jillian Calhoun. I want to shout out my events team: Adion Atik, Trish Grace. But I especially want to shout out Trish, because she was my right hand in the pre-production of the first film that we did. And it was so many meetings. People who work on my teams know I send voice messages a lot. And I don't know, it's become like almost like my trademark, but it's so helpful for communication. You can hear my tone, you can hear the fluctuations, which is just awesome. But I also want to shout out Danielle Hagenseeker, Director of PR Marketing, because during the summer, she was my real anchor when I was in LA at UCLA and doing homecoming stuff on my off days with the Academy. She was that person I could call or voice message, and she was so quick with response. I don't know who, I think also someone I really, really want to shout out is Gina Tamburo. I want to shout out Lamar Walker. I want to shout out Heather Wagner, our main advisors who helped us build Homecoming, because from them, I've gotten so many ideas. I've learned so much leadership skills, I guess, from them, just from observation, from them questioning, like, hey, Ryan, what does this mean, or why is this important? And the constant questioning is really good, because you never want to get into this where you think you know everything, and I know I don't. So having them as an advisor, it was very much, they were trying to pick apart kind of the plan for it to get rebuilt again. And I think that was so influential and so important for us. And yeah.
So Ryan, what's next? What can we expect for Homecoming 2023, and what are your overall hopes for next year's celebration?
My hope is for Homecoming 23, I really want the feeling of Homecoming 22, if that makes sense. There was such a magical environment that was created for Homecoming 22. It was the 150th year, and I'll say it now, the sesquicentennial celebration. I probably still say wrong, but it was just, I don't even know how to like really describe it into words, because it's such an incredible feeling watching everything come to life. It was an incredible feeling seeing everyone at the events and hearing all the positive things, seeing everyone come together for the parade, and seeing all the excitement for the game, the announcement of royalty. I just want the feeling and environment to stay the same. And I mean, I think for what's next, I am not sure. I don't have a master plan like I did for Homecoming 22 right now, because I'm in a more executive role as vice president of programming, where I'm overseeing the events, finance, and production teams. But from conversations we're having right now with Homecoming, I know it's going to be special. But I think also the unknown is kind of important, because it allows you not to get too stressed out or too overwhelmed. It creates space for magic to happen. I think the biggest thing I learned from the Emmys is just like go with the flow. And if you're doing the work, if you're putting in the hours to plan out everything, you have intention behind what you're doing, everything else will pretty much fall in line. If you're collaborating and communicating properly, you'll be like, okay. If you have something that you want to bring to the table that's never been done before, let's do it. Let's try to figure out how to manage it. But I think that's what I'm excited for. I right now I'm excited for the unknown, for the celebrations that will transpire for Homecoming 23, and I'm excited to have been a part of Homecoming 22. I'm excited that I've learned what I've learned from Homecoming 22, and hopefully I can apply it to the rest of our time here.
Well, thank you for your time, Ryan.
Thank you so much.
Really great interviewing you.